campus of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. You're listening to 90.3 KRNU, Lincoln, Nebraska.
Up the floor to Trey McGowan. He'll lob it for his...
On 90.3 KRNU, it's Huskers Hoops Live.
You betcha! Jazz Shelley has a triple-double!
Now, here's your host, Jacob Schwantz.
Welcome into Huskers Hoops Live, as we are officially in March Madness season. Haven't been able to say that the last 2 years, as Nebraska really couldn't get anything going in my freshman year. And then last year you finished basically at 500 after losing in the first round of the Big Ten tournament. But now in year 3 of my college experience, both Nebraska programs are in March Madness. We saw the women's program make it in my freshman year a couple of years ago and go out in that first round. And this is the first time that the men's program has been in the March Madness tournament in a while. So I am so excited to be with you on the air this morning for Huskers Hoops Live. It's going to be one of the biggest episodes that I think I've ever done on this show in its history, talking to the voice of the Texas A&M Aggies, as Andrew Monaco is joining me on the show in just a few minutes, so definitely keep it locked in for that. And then in the back half of the show, we will have Drake Keeler join me once again, talking women's basketball. What are the things going to look like for this Nebraska women's basketball team as they head into the Corvallis Regional? But what a fun week of basketball, not just for Nebraska, but overall for the Big Ten and really just around the country. It's going to be so fun to watch this year. There's going to be upsets. A lot of people are thinking the men's bracket is going to be pretty chalky, but this is March Madness, and it rarely ever goes that way in the way that you would expect in March Madness. In a one-and-done format, you never know what could happen, and that makes it almost more fun to be a Nebraska fan because you're in an 8-9 matchup in the men's tournament, and there's a lot of people saying that, you know, Texas A&M has a great chance of pulling off the, quote, upset in an 8-9. It's not really an upset. It's basically a coin flip. But if Nebraska can pick that win up, you go into a matchup against Houston most likely, and it's March Madness. You know, on a regular any given night, I would say most likely Houston would pick that up. But in March Madness, literally anything can happen. We saw it last year with another Big Ten team in Purdue and the way that they lost to a 16 seed in their first game. So literally anything can happen. It's so exciting, and I'm so glad that today we're able to talk about it because I think it's going to be great fun to watch not only these two Nebraska teams play, but like I said, all these teams, you know, battle for a national championship. But first, we're going to kind of keep it locked on the men's side of things because, like I said, in a few minutes, Andrew Monaco is going to join me. We're going to discuss a little bit about this upcoming matchup on Friday between Nebraska and Texas A&M. And I feel like I have to say the men's matchup because both the men's and women's basketball teams for Nebraska are playing Texas A&M. And over spring break, obviously, Trev Alberts made the move to become the athletic director of the Aggies. So I don't know if we're going to get too much into that because it doesn't really impact the game necessarily, but that's just another very strange storyline that is playing out in this March Madness tournament for Nebraska. But let's talk a little bit about the Big Ten tournament because I think there was a lot of hype after the first game for Nebraska. They came in as a 3 seed in that Big Ten tournament, and wow, did they dominate Indiana in that first game, 93-66. The first half run from Keisei Tominaga was absolutely special. Finished the day not even leading the team in scoring. It was Bryce Williams that tied him with those 23 points. But that first half when Keisei was just hitting, you know, step back jumpers, sidestep threes, he obviously had that, you know, 30-plus footer at the buzzer to give Nebraska 50 points in the first half. And then they followed that up with 43 in the second half. I mean, that was arguably the best performance Nebraska has played all season. And it was coming at the exact perfect time. And this is the type of performance that in a March Madness scenario, Nebraska could have beat anyone on this night. So that's why I say, Houston in the next round, if Nebraska is able to pick up their first March Madness win of their history as a program, if you're matched up with Houston and you go out and you are able to shoot the lights out like they did in this one, going 14 of 32 from three-point range, that's good for 43, almost 44% as a team. You're going to be able to compete with a top seed. They went 12 of 20 from three in the first half, only 2 of 12 in the second. They really cooled down. But that first half was something special. But you think about the offense, you go to the next game, you follow that up with an even better offensive performance in terms of scoring. You put up 51 points in the first half against Illinois and then end up blowing that 11-point lead in the second half because you give up 58 points to the Illini. That was one that gave me concern for March Madness coming up because you saw the highs and you saw the lows as Nebraska played 2 games in the Big Ten tournament. And there was such a good chance, with Purdue going down earlier that day, that Nebraska could have made it to the Big Ten tournament final and played Wisconsin. And I think Nebraska has a chance in that game. They've beat Wisconsin before. And if Nebraska wins that Big Ten tournament, you got to wonder, what is your seed looking like? Where are you being placed? But at this point in the year, you don't have to worry about that anymore because the brackets are set, the matchups are set, and these teams are all locked in on just who's in front of us, what's our next game. And I'm sure that's exactly what Coach Hoiberg is preaching in these practices and in these team meetings. But some of the big concerns out of that Illinois game was just unable to stop the three-point shot. I mean, Illinois scored 13 threes. Nebraska made just 8. And I can't really say this was all defensive mishaps because Terrence Shannon was just he was having basically the best game of his career, I would say. I know he's gone for huge scoring performances even just this season, but 11 of 22 from the field. He got to the line 16 times, knocked down 13. And he goes for 40 points with 0 turnovers. That's just a special performance by arguably the best offensive talent in the Big Ten Conference. And not all of those shots were defensive mishaps. Like I said, he was hitting contested threes. He was driving and finishing through contact that the referees didn't blow a whistle on. And that's good defense. And he just finishes through it. I know sometimes he got fouled and finished through it or drew a foul and then got 2 points at the free throw line. So you don't love to see those, but he's just got a knack to score. And I think, how many times is Nebraska in March Madness really going to see somebody individually go for 40 points to beat this Nebraska team by only 11 in the end? That's what I feel like people aren't really talking about as much is, yeah, Nebraska lost. They blew the lead in the second half, but it took a 40-point effort from Terrence Shannon to beat Nebraska by 11. And Nebraska didn't even play good. Bryce Williams, 8 of 17. That's not horrible. Keisei Tominaga, though, 2 of 9 from 3, 7 of 18 from the field. Rink Mast, 3 of 8 from 3. Not too bad, but 5 of 15 overall from the field. Not super efficient days from Nebraska's best offensive options. So, I think you could look at this Illinois game and be somewhat comfortable in the end if you want to be a little bit optimistic because you're looking at a game that you lose, can't get to the Big Ten tournament final, but it took virtually a Herculean effort by an individual to beat you. So, if that doesn't happen, maybe Nebraska's playing later on in that Big Ten tournament final. Who knows? But I'm going to step aside here. When I come back, we're going to have our first special guest of the day. Andrew Monaco is going to join me on the show, and I'm excited to talk with him about the Texas A&M Aggies and kind of just what we can expect from this Friday matchup here on Huskers Hoops Live on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
difference for kids, for people in poverty, for the environment. Join AmeriCorps and get things done right here in Nebraska. With lots of different programs to choose from, you can serve in your area of passion and develop your skills while earning money to pay for college or to repay student loans. All programs are filling AmeriCorps positions to start September 1st. Learn more and apply at serve.nebraska.gov. Sponsored by Serve Nebraska. Aired with the Nebraska Broadcasters Association and this station.
Exaggerating high school athletic achievements to your new college friends. Promising your new college friends that you'd a partial football scholarship to no-name state in Montana. What are these, you ask? These are the symptoms of someone with high school peaker syndrome, or HSPS. HSPS is a serious mental health condition that affects college students post-high school athletics. Thankfully, there is a cure to this crippling disease known as the UNL Men's Rugby Team. UNL Men's Rugby Team offers students the opportunity to relive those glory days. Tackle your HSPS head-on by visiting the rugby team's website at unlrugby.com.
Dad, I'm hungry. Why don't we have anything to eat?
Those are words you never want to hear as a parent. But unfortunately, putting food on the table is a constant struggle for many low-income families here in Lincoln, and they don't have the necessary skills to get and maintain a job. They rely on volunteers at the Center for People in Need that can help them through the struggle. You can make a difference in their lives by getting involved in one of the many volunteer programs that the Center for People in Need offers. For more information, please visit centerforpeopleinneed.org.
Schrontz back with you on Huskers Hoops Live, and we have our first special guest of the day, Mr. Andrew Monaco, the voice of the Aggies. How you doing?
I am doing well. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I am doing so well, and thanks for joining the show. It's always great to get to pick the brain of someone who's been with this opposing team pretty much the entire season and for a while now. I know it's your 5th season as the voice of the Aggies. You do play-by-play for Aggies football, men's basketball, baseball. You host some coaches shows on the radio as well. You spent 16 years with the San Antonio Spurs. First question for you. When you saw the Aggies get their name called on Selection Sunday, how excited were you to see them get that 9 seed and make it to the dance?
I have to give you a little bit of background for this because it was 2 years ago. We're in a hotel room in Tampa after getting to the SEC Tournament Championship game, and you think you've done enough to get in that year, and they never saw their name pop up. And that's why I think it was so emotional. It was early in the selection show. They see it. I think it's a feeling of relief because once again this year, not sure if they were going to make it. Last year, I thought they got underseeded to go 15-3 in the SEC and be a 7 seed. So I think this was a little bit of validation for what Buzz Williams did. Buzz went out and he created a more difficult non-conference and to go 9-9 in the SEC and then win the first 2 games in the SEC tournament. I think the tournament helped them a little bit this year, especially by beating Kentucky a second time. And as you know, when you play in Nashville, that's not a neutral site when you're playing Kentucky. There's an awful lot of Big Blue Nation that makes its way there. So I think it was a combination of the validation of what they went through, not just this season, but I think through a couple of seasons for guys like Wade Taylor and Boots Radford and Henry Coleman who have been here through that entire run. But I think it was really good to see your name early in the selection show and realize that you're going to take on another Big Ten team. You're going to take on a Nebraska team and do that and do it in Memphis. But it was it was emotional. It was more emotional than I thought.
Yeah, I completely agree with your point about the SEC tournament and the importance of those wins. Obviously, Kentucky pretty much on any year is a tough out, but specifically this year with all that freshman talent that they have, that was very impressive from Texas A&M there. But thinking back a couple of months ago, a little bit maybe late 2023, with the preseason expectations for this Aggies team, now that we're at this point in March Madness, what do you like? How did they match what your preseason expectations were? You
know, what is missing this year is we haven't had Julius Marble this year. And that was, I think, a very key piece, and I don't know if the committee thought about that. But, look, you don't have them, and you have to move on. This team, the expectations were high. When you're second in the SEC, guess what? When you have what I think is at the end of that year, when you had Wade Taylor being a first-team All-SEC, when you had Tyrese Radford being a second-team All-SEC, and you're having that backcourt come back, obviously, your expectations are high, and that was new for Texas A&M. Let's be honest; they're outstanding in the underdog role. As the favorite, they kind of stumbled a couple of years ago. They went to Myrtle Beach, and Murray State got them, and Colorado got them, and it wasn't a great start. And they had to learn what it's like to have those expectations there, and I think they've kind of navigated that very, very well this season. Some close losses. They go to Orlando. They get a rematch with Penn State. They play Florida Atlantic, and they play Iowa State. To me, it sets up beautifully if you're going to have those multi-team events and be in one of those. It really is good to get you started. It's always way too early for net and all that, but there was 3 really good teams for them. And then they go to Virginia, and they play Virginia's style, and it's Virginia's pace, and they never figured it out. But it was 8 games in November for them. Buzz Williams said this: when you have to beef up your non-conference schedule, and you do it that first year, you're going to have to go on the road. So they went to Ohio State, they went to SMU, and that month seemed to catch up with them. But Boots got hurt in Orlando. Henry Coleman gets hurt in Orlando. And what I thought in December was, even though there weren't as many games, I think some guys had to figure out, you know what, we can't rely on Boots all the time. We can't just rely on Henry. And I think some guys blossomed in that moment. I think that's paying off for them. So to me, it's interesting that the team that I still think has to play when the expectations are there, I think they need to learn that. When there's a number next to your name and other schools are coming after you, you've got to learn and play with that confidence. But as the underdog, they really are tough. There's something about that mentality that they have as the underdog that allows them to play well. And I'm not going to say over their head. I just think it gives them something to play for and to prove.
And as the 9 seed in this 8-9 matchup, I guess you could say it's somewhat of an underdog position, even though it virtually is a coin flip almost every year when you're trying to pick those 8-9 matchups. But I think specifically with you guys playing in the SEC, it really prepared you for the difficulty and the challenge of getting through, not even just to the March Madness tournament, but through all those teams. Ultimately, there were 8 SEC teams that make the tourney this year, as opposed to just 6 from the Big Ten. So how do you think the challenge of battling through all those tough conference opponents were able to prepare you guys for March?
I believe it's having to play different styles twice a week. As you know, going through the Big Ten and going through the conference, each team, it's not the same. There's a style to each conference, I get it, but each team is individual. So when you're playing South Carolina one day and Kentucky the next, or you're playing Alabama, as I say that, South Carolina, big, tall, not going to be a lot of possessions. Kentucky, there are going to be a ton of possessions, but you better get used to the pace. Kentucky, Alabama, Florida play with more pace than anybody else in the conference. When you take on Tennessee, you're finding something completely different. A Rick Barnes team, always going to be defense first, but you've got a point guard in Zakai Ziegler, who's the best defensive player and is quick as a rumor, that's for sure. And you have Dalton Connect, who is a transfer who can just knock down shots. I think when you have to do that every Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Saturday, I think you see almost everything. And the non-conference I thought was interesting. Virginia with the slow pace. Iowa State, we see the payoff for them. Not the same. No team's the same in November as they are in March, that's for sure. But you play those different styles even in a tournament. And then you go to Virginia, and you're going to play where, possessions are at a premium. Buzz compares it to taking a 50-question test versus a 100-question test, 25-question test when you're playing Virginia. You better not get one wrong because you're losing 4 points every time you get it wrong. And that's Virginia. And you play Memphis and you play Houston. And Houston is physical. Absolutely physical, and you have to be tough with the ball every single time that you're dribbling. I think teams get to this time of year, and there's certain teams. what I do with Buzz is, hey, when you play a new team or you play a team you haven't seen in the conference as it gets later, Buzz, are they similar to someone that we have played before? And I think that kind of helps you. But because there's so many different styles throughout the SEC, so many teams that have improved. LSU was better this year. I think that helps you. I think that gives you, and this is for all teams, I think it gives you something to familiarize yourself when you're playing an opponent that you have not seen. And that's what's going to happen. The Aggies haven't seen Nebraska. So who are the Huskers closest to for Texas A&M? I think that's what the coaches do now with the players.
This is Andrew Monaco joining me on Huskers Hoops Live this morning, the radio voice of the Aggies for baseball, basketball, and football, among other things. But Mr. Monaco, last year you guys lost in the first round to Penn State. That's a Big Ten team. You guys are trying to avoid that same result this year, and I think one of the main concerns on Nebraska's side in this matchup is clearly the offensive rebounding acumen that you guys have put together. Tops in the country at over 17 offensive rebounds per game. You do give up a lot of threes though, almost 9 a game to your opponent. So how do you think those two factors are going to kind of balance in this game on Friday?
Jacob, you ready for the good news, bad news for Texas A&M? The good news is they offensive rebound. The bad news is they don't always shoot really well. So and Buzz says that. And the way this defense plays, sometimes it's predicated on giving up that three. And they contest threes, though. That's the thing. If you can hit a contested three, more power to you. But the Aggies kind of funnel it that way. It's going to be a little bit of a different defense than teams have seen. And I've always often thought that has been sometimes the calling card for this team is the defense that they play, and they take pride in it. The offensive rebounding, again, joking, but that's been kind of it, because when you're taking a three, that's going to be a long rebound. And for Texas A&M, everybody rebounds. This isn't just your bigs will go get it. Your guards will rebound. You'll see Boots Radford. I quit a couple years ago calling him a great rebounder at 6'2". He's just a great rebounder. They read the ball, and they read where the shot is coming, and they anticipate where it's going to go. Anderson Garcia, we call him the Dominican Rodman. There's just a relentlessness on that offensive glass, and to get that extra possession. And that becomes it. For the Aggies, they've got to get more rebounds, which means they've got to get more shots than the other team. They've got to get to the free throw line and take more free throws than the other team. They're big on protecting the rim, but they've got to contest those three-point shots. And Penn State obliterated Texas A&M last year from beyond the arc. And it was not a game. But I felt from that one, it was because the Aggie defense was not – Penn State was very good, took full advantage. But I never thought the Aggie defense was what we had seen throughout the regular season into that conference game. So the defense sets up everything for the Aggies. And – the challenge then was, you had a great offensive rebounding team. Now you've got a defensive rebound. Buzz is big on offensive rebound percentage, defensive rebound percentage, and the Aggies won in the SEC when it comes to offensive rebound percentage. Number 3 and number 4 when it comes to they've got to be one and done. And when they take on teams that like to offensive rebound, Florida was that way throughout the entire season. Great offensive rebounding team with their height and their skill. But the Aggies have to have advantages to give themselves a chance to win any game.
And Nebraska just lost to Illinois in the Big Ten tournament semifinal, and Illinois was pretty much the best offensive rebounding team in the Big Ten, and that's a team that beat Nebraska multiple times this year. So I think that's something that Nebraska obviously is going to be concerned about. But as we kind of wrap up here, I don't want to take too much of your time. Who's maybe one impact player that Nebraska fans should maybe familiarize themselves with before Friday? And then, if possible, I could get a final score prediction from you.
Wade Taylor, the fourth, it will be the one. He's been all SEC and absolutely deserves it. And I love the game that he's evolved. He's evolved over 3 years, I think, here at Texas A&M. Will have the ball in his hands, but not exclusively. You're going to see the 3-guard lineup with Manny Obaski. Manny, by the way, has really injected something different to this team in the last 7 games. I think he's a big part of the 5-game winning streak. They've kind of picked up the pace as well. but 4, and that's what we call him, Wade Taylor the fourth. He's the one. He's not afraid to shoot, but he can also distribute. You will see a joy for the game in Wade Taylor the fourth. He reminds me, and when I say this, the face, the joy of Magic Johnson. Obviously, he doesn't have the same size as Magic, but you know him, on the face. I think he's the one, but this is very much a team for them. You'll watch Anderson Garcia. He's the one on the offensive rebounds. Something special for there. Scores, oh, man. This one will be interesting. Walnuts. I'm hesitating because for the most part, I would say this game would be in the 70s. But the Aggies actually picked up the pace late in this season. And they scored in the 90s twice in the SEC tournament. And before that, they put up 86 at Ole Miss. So, let's say the game's going to ready? First to 80 wins. How about that?
I like it. I think I can agree with that because I think for Nebraska to win, they're going to have to hit a bunch of threes. And if that's going on and the way that, if Keisei Tominaga starts to pop off or Rink Mass starts hitting threes, I think the Aggies are going to have to almost kind of respond in that same way and maybe have one of those good offensive days like you mentioned that they had in the SEC tournament. So I definitely think regardless of who comes out on top, this might be the most entertaining matchup on Friday because of how evenly matched these teams are and the two different styles where Nebraska is shooting a lot of threes but not rebounding as good as Texas A&M. So, Andrew, thank you so much for joining the show. It was an honor.
Jacob, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, I will let you go. And that was Andrew Monaco joining the show this morning. Great to see him kind of get to talk about his team. He's been there for a while now, and it was awesome to kind of pick his brain. And I definitely think this Texas A&M matchup is going to be something really entertaining to watch. I know, obviously, here in Nebraska, fans are going to be hoping that the Huskers come out on top and maybe they, look very good and they're moving on to the next round against Houston. But I think this Aggies team is not going to be as easy or as dominant of a performance from Nebraska like we saw a couple games ago against Indiana. I really think that offensive rebounding and just rebounding in general is going to keep Nebraska, even if they're in the lead, they're going to keep Nebraska close. And it's going to be a little bit stressful because with it being such a close game, fans are going to be always anxious. When are we going to give up this lead? When are the Aggies going to go on a run and take this lead and never look back? So just make sure it's a 40-minute game. Don't, click away from the screen if Nebraska goes down a little bit because we know Nebraska can go on a bit of a run in a very quick time period. We saw that against Indiana where the Huskers in that first half put together, I think it was 3 or 4 3-pointers in a row and eventually took a pretty big lead headed into the second half. But that's not the only guest we have on the show today. Drake Keeler is expected to be joining me in just a little bit as it's going to be very, very interesting and fun to now talk about the women's side of things in March Madness. It was awesome to see this women's team make that amazing run through the Big Ten tournament and get to that final matchup against Iowa, come so close, force overtime against one of the top seeds in the entire March Madness tournament. And now they have a chance to continue a lot of that good momentum on Friday night. But I'm going to step aside here on Huskers Hoops Live. When I come back, I'll have Drake with me, and we'll get that discussion going on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
Getting involved on campus, meeting new friends, and networking for the future can seem scary, but Scarlet Guard makes it easy for both graduate and undergraduates. Social events help students connect with others around campus, while the professional events help students network with alumni from around the globe. Possibilities within Scarlet Guard are endless, so join today. Go to huskeralum.org/ScarletGuard or contact the Nebraska Alumni Association. Students today, alumni tomorrow, Huskers forever.
This is Logan.
What's up, everyone?
Logan's been going to UNL for 4 years now.
I know everything that's going on here.
Logan is somewhat informed about campus events.
Like the football game, and I think there's some kind of election, I think.
Don't be like Logan. Pick up a copy of the Daily Nebraskan or follow them on Facebook and Twitter. Not only can you be updated with events on campus, you can read profiles on some of the most interesting people around Lincoln and get unique coverage found nowhere else, because keeping up with the news is one of the most important things a student can do.
The opportunity to grow your own fruits and vegetables the way you like them is right at your fingertips. In neighborhoods just like yours, Community Crops lends various plots of land to families in which they can grow their own food. Join hundreds of families in the Lincoln community as they work this spring planting and harvesting crops in the city's 15 gardens. Start today by registering for the Community Crops Training Program, or to learn more, visit www.communitycrops.org.
Jake Schrantz back with you on Huskers Hoops Live, and we have our second guest of the morning, Mr. Drake Keeler, joining me on the show to talk some women's basketball. How you doing, Drake?
I'm doing good.
All right, so we have a very important matchup coming up this Friday, Nebraska against Texas A&M in women's and men's basketball. Kind of an interesting scenario there, but first question I want to ask you, and just kind of pick your brain. 3 SEC teams in this one region with Nebraska, including Texas A&M, 8 total SEC teams in March Madness this year. It really seems like the Aggies, even though they are the 11th seed in this bracket, they are not going to be a slouch in the slightest in this game on Friday night.
Absolutely not. They are definitely a team that can pull the upset here. You look at kind of how they ended the regular season. They went 1-5 in the last 6 games of the regular season, particularly. Those came without kind of their starting point guard, and you know that was a big loss they had. She came back off the bench for the SEC tournament and kind of led them to that win over Mississippi State. They fought against a very good South Carolina team, obviously. And they've got size. They've got kind of a lot of what you want in a good basketball team. So that is not going to be an easy matchup for Nebraska for sure.
And with the Huskers coming in as the 6th seed in this bracket, how do you feel about that seeding? Is that a little too low, maybe too high, or is that kind of just right after what we saw with them getting all the way to overtime in the Big Ten tournament final?
Yeah, I think I was a little surprised by it. All of the projections kind of said 8th seed. I thought maybe they would jump up to a 7th seed because of, how they had played as of late. The committee obviously really weighed that tourney run heavily. I get it. I probably still think they probably should have been a 7, but, a 6 is reasonable and obviously sets them up really well, so that they are definitely happy with that.
Nebraska is one of 7 Big Ten teams to make March Madness this year, and I think that with how impressive the schedule was this year for Nebraska, especially in the conference with how many, talented teams there are in the Big Ten, I feel like that it's a positive because it lets you build up a strong enough resume to be a certainly in team, but at the same time, you kind of beat yourself up against all these other teams and maybe limit your ceiling in terms of, how deep you can get into March.
Yeah, it was really impressive, kind of the work they did in the Big Ten season. Obviously, they took some tough losses to Rutgers. Illinois wasn't the same as they were last year. Minnesota, Penn State fell off down the stretch. But, against the kind of bottom 3 teams that made the tournament, Michigan, Michigan State, and Maryland, they went 6-0 against those 3. And that is ridiculously impressive for Nebraska. So, yeah, they look really good right now.
And I think with what happened early in the season with Allison Widener going out for the year pretty much before a game was even played, I think there was some concern that, maybe this Nebraska team would struggle to fight through that adversity. And with them getting all the way to a 6 seed, I think that almost puts a little bit more feather in the cap, if you will, of Coach Amy Williams to be able to kind of right the ship, figure out some lineups that are going to work, get these freshmen moving pretty much from the get-go. I feel like we talked about it multiple times on this show together, how successful, whether it was Natalie Potts, who won Big Ten Freshman of the Year, or whether it was someone like Logan Nisley, who was really broken out of her shell in the last month or so. I think Coach Williams did a pretty great job with the roster she was given this year.
Yeah, I think if you told me ahead of game one, knowing that Allison Widener would be out for this season, that this team would end up a 6th seed in the NCAA tournament, I'd be pretty surprised. So they've done a great job with what they've had. I think there were still kind of tournament expectations for sure. But, the freshmen have played really well right away. Alexis Markowski has kind of just taken the jump to being a real, consistent star for this team. It's just been a fantastic season for them already, and they'll look to get the first tournament win they've had under Amy Williams.
So last night I was looking at Texas A&M's notable results. That's something that on the ESPN website they put for pretty much every matchup. They had a nice win over Kansas by 11 in December, but looking at other than that, they had 2 losses to LSU by 17 and 23 points respectively, a 35-point and an 11-point loss to South Carolina, losses to Mississippi State, Tennessee, and Alabama. So looking at those results, they don't have nearly as strong of a kind of a conference record that I think Nebraska was able to put together this season, obviously with the 2 wins over Michigan State, like you said, sweeping Michigan, defeating Maryland, and then obviously the cherry on top with the Iowa upset. I think this may lend itself to Nebraska maybe getting into that next round, as long as they don't kind of shoot themselves in the foot.
Yeah, for sure. They're Texas A&M is an 11 seed for a reason. They were kind of on the bubble coming in to Selection Sunday. But, their offense has kind of really struggled. They have talent, just not super consistent. They can take settle for some bad shots for sure. They also lost they played one Big Ten team this year. They lost to Purdue. That's kind of a pretty surprising result in hindsight. But, that was surprising. They've had some injuries they've had to work through. They have a really good defense. I think this is, still a good Texas A&M team for sure. There's also a reason why they're in the tournament, and they present some matchup problems for Nebraska. But, it's a matchup Nebraska should feel confident going into.
Yeah, it definitely seems like Texas A&M is going to be relying on kind of a slower-paced defensive style of this game. They average less than 59 points allowed per game, which is incredibly impressive to me. But what is the biggest thing you think that could hold Nebraska back themselves? Is it maybe something you saw in the loss to Iowa in the Big Ten tournament title game? Is it like, what is it about this team that Texas A&M wouldn't necessarily cause, but maybe Nebraska would just fail to do?
Yeah, I think it is kind of how Texas A&M matches up. They've got, 6'5" Lauren Ware kind of at that center spot, 6'4" Janiah Barker next to her. That's going to be tough for Natalie Potts and Alexis Markowski to handle. And they've got to establish, find a way to establish a front court presence still for Alexis. I think it's still possible for sure. But they've got to, not settle offensively and really, work and not get beat physically on that end. And also just be locked in defensively. Janiah Barker, another player who is a problem, 6'4", or whatever I said, is super fluid, super athletic, doesn't shoot maybe the highest percentage always, but she can be a problem, and they've got talent for sure. So they've really got to be locked in on both ends.
And if Nebraska wins this matchup on Friday, they move on to face either Oregon State or Eastern Washington. There's a couple other notables in this quadrant. Obviously, the number 1 overall seed in the entire bracket with South Carolina. You've got Michigan State, Oklahoma, Indiana among some of the others. So a couple of Big Ten foes that Nebraska saw this year. What would you kind of deem as a successful run in this bracket? Is it just getting that win on Friday and cementing Nebraska as, a March Madness success story? Would it need a couple more wins, maybe a Sweet 16 bid? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think honestly one win is, pretty successful. They haven't had that under Amy Williams, so just getting that is really important. But I will say that the path to the Sweet 16 is about, as favorable as they could ask for. You look around the bracket, the other three seeds are UConn, which, needs no explanation, LSU, the defending champs, and NC State, which is, a team that's here every year and is really good. So they got a pretty good draw. Oregon State's a really good team as well, but, not quite at the caliber of those other three seeds, in my opinion. So I think they can match up well in that game if they, advance to it. I would say that's probably the ceiling. Sweet 16 is probably the ceiling I put on it. I really like Notre Dame. Hannah Hidalgo is ridiculous as a freshman, and obviously South Carolina on the other side is undefeated for a reason. But, yeah, I think one win would be, pretty satisfying, and two is definitely in the cards.
And just real quick off of Nebraska for a second, I couldn't believe how stacked the right side of that bracket was with Iowa. You got UConn, Ohio State, LSU, just to name a few. I mean, like you said, this was a pretty good draw for Nebraska. If they are going to go on a little bit of a, not necessarily Cinderella run, a top 6 seed is still a quality team, but you only have to go through maybe Oregon State and Notre Dame to get to that pretty deep into March Madness. And I think it definitely does end somewhere before meeting South Carolina, because that's just a team that has too much talent for Nebraska to handle right now. But I agree that they had a great draw. So as we kind of wrap up this discussion, who's one player you're looking for on Nebraska to really shine on Friday and kind of lead this team to a big March Madness win?
Yeah, I think I'll kind of give two answers. I think the obvious one, I'm going to say Alexis Markowski is just really key to establish that in the front court. This is going to be a big test for her, so that'll be something to watch. Other than that, maybe kind of under the radar, I really just want to see how Logan Nisley plays. She was massive in the Big Ten tournament, has had huge games, was huge against Iowa. Another freshman who's just really been stepping up, and Nebraska's going to need, good play from their guards on both ends, and I think, she can be kind of the X factor there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I feel like Logan Nisley is someone that not even just this year has been important, but 100% for the future of this Nebraska program. She is going to be vital to that backcourt, because you think about how Jazz Shelley will be gone after this season. They're really going to need some offensive skill and production to inject into the newer teams. So I feel like Logan Nisley, the way that she's been able to work into the starting lineup at the late portion of the season and hold her own against some pretty talented players outside of, in the Big Ten, I think it's really been impressive the way that she has put some work together late in the year. But Drake, it's always good to talk with you. I'm excited for this game on Friday. Are you being sent out to Corvallis to cover this game?
That is to be decided for that.
Got you. Well, regardless, it's going to be a fun one to watch. I'm thinking Nebraska should move on to the next game against probably Oregon State, but it's March Madness. Crazier things have happened than an 11-seed upset. So we will kind of just sit back and watch, and I hope you have a good time covering this game.
Thank you, yeah.
All right, that was Drake Keeler joining me on the show once again. Always great to talk with him on Nebraska women's basketball and just kind of pick his brain about this team that he covers so extensively for Hurrdat Sports. So, Nebraska and Texas A&M, 2 matchups on Friday. It's going to be kind of a Nebraska marathon, if you will, in the world of March Madness. So I think this is a game that the Huskers could win. It's definitely a more I would say an easier matchup than on the men's side of things, where it's that 8-9, 2 very, very evenly matched teams, 2 teams with a style that is so similar. And I think Nebraska can get it done in both of them, but we'll have to wait and see. Going to step aside here on 90.3 KRNU. When I come back, going to look a little bit around the Big Ten, see what some of these other teams are looking at in their March Madness scenario, because we've been covering them all year. So let's go take a look in a moment on 90.3 KRNU and the Huskers Hoops Live YouTube channel.
Thanks for calling Jake's Bouncy House. This is Jake. How can I help you? Hi, Jake. My name's Stanley, and I was just wondering if you're hiring. No, we're actually not. Sorry for the inconvenience. Oh, Burt's Bees. I can't find a job anywhere.
If you're a college student in need of a job, UNL's Career Services is here to help. With jobs ranging from Bouncy House employees to internships, UNL Career Services has a fit for everyone. Visit them on the second floor of the City Union or anytime online at unl.edu/careers. The help you need to make money is at the tip of your fingers.
Exaggerating high school athletic achievements to your new college friends. Promising your new college friends that you'd a partial football scholarship to no-name state in Montana. What are these, you ask? These are the symptoms of someone with high school peaker syndrome, or HSPS. HSPS is a serious mental health condition that affects college students post-high school athletics. Thankfully, there is a cure to this crippling disease known as the UNL men's rugby team. UNL men's rugby team offers students the opportunity to relive those glory days. Tackle your HSPS head-on by visiting the rugby team's website at unlrugby.com.
If you're experiencing anxiety, depression, grief, or are even just homesick, try talking to a friendly professional at CAPS, your university's counseling and psychological service. They offer individual and group services to any registered student at UNL. International students, that means you too. Just call your university health center on city campus anytime Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. The services are easy and confidential, and the best part is the first 3 sessions are free. Go online at health.unl.edu/caps.
This is Logan.
What's up, everyone?
Logan's been going to UNL for 4 years now.
I know everything that's going on here.
Logan is somewhat informed about campus events.
Like the football game, and I think there's some kind of election, I think.
Don't be like Logan. Pick up a copy of the Daily Nebraskan or follow them on Facebook and Twitter. Not only can you be updated with events on campus, you can read profiles on some of the most interesting people around Lincoln and get unique coverage found nowhere else, because keeping up with the news is one of the most important things a student can do.
Dad, I'm hungry. Why don't we have anything to eat?
Those are words you never want to hear as a parent. But unfortunately, putting food on the table is a constant struggle for many low-income families here in Lincoln, and they don't have the necessary skills to get and maintain a job. They rely on volunteers at the Center for People in Need that can help them through the struggle. You can make a difference in their lives by getting involved in one of the many volunteer programs that the Center for People in Need offers. For more information, please visit centerforpeopleinneed.org.
Do you want to make a difference for kids, for people in poverty, for the environment? Join AmeriCorps and get things done right here in Nebraska. With lots of different programs to choose from, you can serve in your area of passion and develop your skills while earning money to pay for college or to repay student loans. All programs are filling AmeriCorps positions to start September 1st. Learn more and apply at serve.nebraska.gov. Sponsored by Serve Nebraska. Aired with the Nebraska Broadcasters Association and this station.
The risk of an American man developing cancer in his lifetime is a little less than 1 in 2. The risk of an American woman developing cancer in her lifetime is a little more than 1 in 3, but the death rates of cancer have been declining in men and women since the early 1990s.
I relay for the support of my sister.
I relay for the support of my grandfather.
I relay for the support of my uncle.
Keep helping those in need by participating in Relay for Life. Join us for Relay for Life at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln each year to fight back against cancer. Sign up for your community event or donate at relayforlife.org.
Jake Schrantz back with you to wrap up the 19th episode of Huskers Hoops Live this season as we continue to discuss March Madness. Selection Sunday was just a couple of days ago, and now I want to take a little bit of a look at some of these other Big Ten teams. We'll look at the men's bracket for now. Number 1 seed Purdue. They're taking on a 16 seed for the second year in a row. and then they will go on to face either Utah State or TCU in the next round. However, they've lost to 3 double-digit seeds in a row the last 3 years, including last year with the loss to FDU, who was the 16 seed. Only the second time ever that a 1 seed has lost their first game in March Madness. I would say maybe Purdue has the most pressure on them out of any of the teams in the entire tournament field. Never mind just the Big Ten teams that made it, the 6 teams that made it. I would say, honestly, though, that behind Purdue probably is Nebraska. Unfortunately, I feel like they've got a lot of pressure. Coach Hoiberg, he won Big Ten Co-Coach of the Year. This is a team that came into the Big Ten tournament as the 3 seed and finished just shy of making it to the tournament final. And they're the only power conference team with 0 March Madness wins in their program history. So I feel like you have to get it done this year. This is the year that Nebraska gets that off their shoulders and becomes a team with a March Madness win. I think that is a lot of pressure, but at the same time, I think it can happen behind big performances from Keisei Tominaga, Rick Mast, Bryce Williams, and maybe some of the others as well. But Purdue, not an easy team to kind of predict in this tournament because of the difficulty kind of based on their prior experience in March Madness. It's kind of hard to predict because, you might think, oh, Purdue, they've got a cakewalk in their field. Their 4 seed is Kansas. They might get upset with all their injuries. Creighton's probably the toughest team outside of maybe Tennessee, the 2 seed in that region. But that's one of the easier regions in this bracket for a 1 seed. And I think a lot of people want to put Purdue far, and maybe that's what's going to happen. But it gives me hesitation based on their prior few years of getting upset. Northwestern, they're another Big Ten team in this bracket. Let's look at them. They are facing FAU in an 8-9 matchup. That one's going to be fun. Boo Buie, he is pretty much going to have to carry his team in that one just for a chance to play the top overall seed UConn Huskies. That's not an easy scenario to put Boo Buie in. I know he's a very experienced player, one of the oldest players in the Big Ten, but carrying your team over the FAU Owls who made the Final Four last year, that's not going to be anything that's easy. And then you move on to arguably the favorite for the national championship. That's a tough scenario to be in. So good luck to Boo Buie. I'm thinking Northwestern's going to lose before the Sweet 16, though, whether it's in that first round or if they lose to UConn. Up next, you have Illinois. They're facing Morehead State, the 3 seed, after winning the Big Ten tournament. They are playing some of their best basketball of the season right now. They were pretty consistent all year. Without Terrence Shannon Jr., kind of became a little bit lesser of what they could be, but when he came back, he turned it right back on, and Illinois started playing really well. And I think he's probably playing the best basketball of his career right now, seen with the 40 points against Nebraska. I think he had 32 in the Big Ten tournament title game. I think he scored almost 100 points in 3 games that they played in the Big Ten tournament. So he's playing insane right now. They've got some other guys that can shoot. Damask was all-conference first team. So we'll see if they can continue that success and take down Morehead State. They will have to play either 6-seeded BYU or maybe the 11-seeded Duquesne team, who really gave Nebraska some trouble earlier on in the season, and they won the Atlantic 10 Tournament Championship for the first time since 1977. This past Sunday. So don't sleep on Duquesne. That's a team that I think could pull off the upset and maybe give Illinois a challenge in the next round. Michigan State, they are also in a tough one. They've got Mississippi State in their first matchup. That's another 8-9. And the Spartans, after almost beating Purdue in the Big Ten tournament, they may have a little bit of a run up their sleeves. That's a team that the experts have stayed confident on the entire year, even after maybe an underwhelming performance in the conference. But if they can pick up that win, they will end up playing probably North Carolina, as long as the Tar Heels don't become the third ever number 1 seed to lose their first game of the bracket. And then finally, Wisconsin, they've got James Madison, another tough draw for the Big Ten in this bracket. That's a 5-12 seed matchup, the most commonly picked upset match. And James Madison, you want to know why they're a common pick this year specifically for an upset? They just went 31-3, winning their conference tournament and having a non-conference win over the Michigan State Spartans. So they've got pretty much everything you would want out of an upset team from a non-power school. They've got an insane record of 30-plus wins. They are playing good at the end of the year. They have experience beating a good conference team from the Big Ten. So I think Wisconsin, even though they're playing a lot better than they were in the final 10 games of the regular season, this was a Wisconsin team that I said on this show I was not super confident in at the end of the regular season. They had lost most of their final 10 games, and then all of a sudden in the Big Ten tournament, they just completely turned it around, and they got some great performances from Blackwell and A.J. Storr. Chucky Hepburn was contributing. So, Wisconsin might be not as drastic of a team or not as dire of a team as I thought they were at this point. They really turned it around, but man, James Madison had a great year, and they have some great players that have led them to some really important wins that got them to this point in March Madness. So that kind of wraps up the Big Ten teams for the men's bracket. So I just wanted to kind of look around at that just to see where some of Nebraska's competition all season is looking at in the Big Ten, in the March Madness tournament. But as we wrap up the show, I kind of want to just give a little bit of an overall look at Nebraska ball's regular season once more, just in case this is the last show where, we have games to look forward to for this year. So you think about what was expected out of Coach Hoiberg's squad in the preseason, not as high as we ended up seeing at the end of the year. They were projected by the media to be the 12th team in the Big Ten standings, and they ended up finishing third in the Big Ten Conference, getting their first March Madness bid in quite a while. It's definitely the first time since I've been here at Nebraska. So I think that's fair to say this is maybe the most impressive season for a Nebraska men's basketball team maybe ever. I mean, just based on what was expected of them to now what we see in March Madness, where they are a top 8 seed, they were a top 4 seed in the Big Ten tournament, and there was most of the media that did not expect this. They thought Nebraska would be another team, another year where they're just trying to figure out, who are their main guys, how are we going to rebuild this program? And Nebraska pretty much took the fast track to becoming a great team. And that is what they are. They are a great team. But on the women's side of things, I kind of touched on it with Drake Keeler earlier on the show, but they were expected to be pretty strong. And then with that injury to Allison Widener that knocked her out of the rest of the season before the season really even started, we didn't get to see her even play a game. That kind of, I think, limited the ceiling in terms of expectations for this team. But again, Coach Williams leads this team the way she does since I've been here, pretty much. Able to take the roster that she's given, work with them, develop players over a season. We saw that with Logan Nisley. We saw that with Jess Petrie. I think Natalie Potts was kind of, from the get-go, I don't know how much development she really needed. She was basically just a great player from the start. Almost reminded me of what we saw from Alexis Markowski in her freshman year. And coincidentally, both Markowski and Potts are Big Ten Freshman of the Year winners. But that development of the two other freshmen into strong rotational pieces, I think shows what Amy Williams can do with solid rosters. So, what can we expect when they actually have a fantastic roster? I think these are pretty good to maybe slightly great rosters right now for Nebraska, but what happens when the Huskers are starting to pull even more impressive recruits? It's going to be something special. But overall, this was probably the most successful, all-encompassing years for Nebraska basketball in quite a while. 3 court stormings, beating Purdue, Wisconsin, and then in Iowa in women's basketball. All 3 of those were so significant to getting to this point of the season in March Madness. And it's just been so fun to cover this team every week on Tuesday mornings with Huskers Hoops Live. So hopefully we'll have more games to talk about next week. But if not, it has been an awesome ride in 2023 and early 2024. But let's keep it going. Let's make sure that the Huskers get some March Madness wins and the men's team gets their first March Madness win of program history. But with that being said, let's go Big Red. It's March.
Indie, alternative, and local music, 90.3 KRNU